For my next guest to defend her title, please welcome UFC Women's Champion Ronda Rousey.
Sonya Blade is, she's a defender of Earthrealm in Mortal Kombat.
And eat at the rate of melting, you know? I want to eat at my own rate.
Because Dana and Lorenzo wanted to do something nice for the ladies.
Product placement, everything.
She was brash, unapologetic, and seemingly unstoppable. At her peak, she was more than just a fighter. She was a cultural phenomenon, a household name who dragged an entire sport into the mainstream spotlight. Ronda Rousey wasn't simply another champion. She was the face of women's mixed martial arts, a pioneer who made the impossible possible. But behind the highlight reels and magazine covers was a story filled with triumph, struggle, and the haunting truth that even the most dominant figures can fall from the top faster than anyone ever imagined. To understand the rise of Ronda Rousey, we have to rewind back to the beginning. Born in Riverside, California in 1987, she entered the world with complications. As an infant, Ronda struggled with apraxia of speech, a neurological condition that made forming words difficult. For the first years of her life, she couldn't speak clearly, often feeling isolated and misunderstood. But have a way of shattering in an instant. That shattering moment was coming. But for now, Ronda Rousey was on top of the world. A young woman who had once lived in her car after the Olympics was now one of the biggest stars in sports, commanding millions of dollars, commanding the respect of Hollywood, and commanding fear in the hearts of her opponents. Her rise was meteoric, historic, and unlike anything MMA had ever seen before. But what happens when the world finally sees the hero fall? The illusion of invincibility can last a long time, but eventually reality finds its way through. For Ronda Rousey, that reality arrived on November 14, 2015, in Melbourne, Australia. She stepped into the octagon to defend her bantamweight title against Holly Holm, a decorated boxer and kickboxer who is seen by many as a massive underdog. The crowd was enormous, over 50,000 people, the largest in UFC history at the time. The atmosphere spitting out bold predictions and then backing them up with devastating performances. She wasn't afraid to talk trash, but more importantly, she wasn't afraid to finish fights in style. Her reign was brutal and efficient. She dispatched Miesha Tate, Kat Zingano, Sarah McMahon, Alexis Davis, and Beth Correa, often in under a minute. Fans didn't even have time to settle into their seats before Ronda was already standing with her arm raised. The aura of invincibility grew with each victory. The UFC marketed her as Rowdy Ronda Rousey, a nickname borrowed with blessing from pro wrestling legend Roddy Piper. She wasn't just a fighter, she was a brand. Hollywood came calling. She appeared in blockbuster movies like The Expendables 3, Furious 7, and Entourage. She was on the cover of Sports Illustrated, featured in ESPN's Body issue, and named the most dominant athlete alive by magazines. At her peak, she was being compared to icons like Mike Tyson. Just like Tyson, fans tuned in to see her win or lose, knowing either outcome would be spectacular. She wasn't only drawing MMA fans. She was pulling in casual viewers, celebrities. She qualified for the 2004 Olympic Games in Athens, making her the youngest judoka there. She didn't medal, but the experience lit a fire inside her. She knew she belonged on the biggest stages, and she wasn't going to settle until she proved it. 4 years later, in Beijing, she made history. Ronda Rousey won the bronze medal in judo, becoming the first American woman ever to stand on the Olympic podium in the sport. It was validation, but it was also the beginning of an identity crisis. After dedicating her entire youth to judo, she suddenly found herself at the end of the road with nowhere else to go. post-Olympics life was not glamorous. Unlike boxers or basketball players, judokas didn't transition into millionaires after winning medals. Ronda struggled financially, living out of her car at times, working odd jobs as a bartender and a veterinary assistant just to get by. She had tasted glory, but now reality was crushing. She needed a new path. That path appeared in the form of mixed martial arts. Women's MMA wasn't even close to mainstream acceptance at the time. The UFC had no female divisions. The sport was seen as brutal about the sport before. She was a one-woman revolution. But as history has shown us, the higher the rise, the harder the fall. Ronda's dominance created sky-high expectations. She was unbeatable. Or so everyone thought. With each win, the mystique grew. But so did the pressure. The UFC leaned heavily on her star power, building entire pay-per-views around her, sometimes at the expense of other fighters. She became both the face of women's MMA and its biggest target. What no one knew then was that behind the bravado, behind the quick finishes, and the magazine covers, Ronda Rousey was carrying enormous weight. The weight of expectation, the pressure of being the pioneer, and the burden of never being allowed to lose. By 2015, she was at her absolute peak. Her fight against Bethe Correia in Brazil ended in just 34 seconds. Her win over Kat Zingano, 14 seconds. The UFC was billing her as unbeatable, unstoppable, a once-in-a-lifetime athlete. Even mainstream outlets began speculating that she could beat men, that she was invincible. But invincibility is an illusion, and illusions was electric, the expectation almost suffocating. This was supposed to be just another Ronda Rousey showcase, another highlight reel finish, another quick reminder that she was untouchable. But instead, it became the night everything changed. From the opening bell, something felt different. Holm wasn't intimidated. She didn't rush, didn't panic, and didn't give Ronda the openings that so many others had. Instead, she circled, kept her distance, and used her footwork to stay clear of Ronda's aggressive charges. Rousey, usually the hunter, suddenly looked like she was chasing shadows. That same frustration that weighed her down as a child later fueled her relentless drive. She grew up tough, stubborn, and unwilling to be defined by limitations. Her mother, Anne-Maria de Mars, was no ordinary parent. She herself was a pioneer in martial arts, the first American to win a World Judo Championship in 1984. Anne-Maria raised her daughter with discipline, resilience, and a ferocious belief that strength was not optional. It was survival. Their household wasn't like others. While many kids were told to take up hobbies, Ronda was being drilled in the art of throws, grips, and submissions before she was even a teenager. Her childhood wasn't sugar-coated. It was molded by hardship. When Ronda was just 8 years old, her father committed suicide after suffering from chronic back injuries. It was a devastating blow that left permanent scars on her, but it also hardened her resolve. Loss would become a recurring theme in her life, and the way she responded to it would define her legacy. By her teenage years, Ronda was already carving a name in the world of judo. She was ferocious, unrelenting, and talented. At only 17, niche and mostly male-dominated. But Ronda didn't see limits. With her judo background and her ability to transition seamlessly into arm bars, she became a nightmare opponent for anyone standing across from her. From the moment she stepped into the cage, it was clear she wasn't like the others. She wasn't there to take part. She was there to dominate. Her early fights were short, vicious, and unforgettable. Ronda had a signature move that became her trademark, the armbar. Opponents knew it was coming, but they couldn't stop it. She ripped through her competition in under a minute, again and again, almost making it look unfair. Within months, she went from an unknown Olympian to the most feared woman in MMA. Her arrival coincided with the efforts of Strikeforce, a promotion willing to take risks on female fighters when the UFC refused. It was there that Ronda started gaining attention, demolishing anyone who stood in her way. And when she won the Strikeforce Women's Bantamweight Championship in 2012, Dana White could no longer deny the obvious. The UFC, which had once boldly declared that women would never fight inside its octagon, signed Ronda Rousey as its very first female fighter. She wasn't just given a contract, she was handed a belt and crowned the inaugural women's bantamweight champion before even setting foot inside a UFC cage. That decision was controversial, but it paid off almost immediately. Her UFC debut against Liz Carmouche in 2013 was a watershed moment. For the first time in history, a UFC event was headlined by women. The stakes were enormous, and the scrutiny was relentless. Ronda was tested early in the fight when Carmouche nearly locked in a choke, but in true Rousey fashion, she escaped and finished the fight with her signature armbar in the very first round. The crowd erupted, and history had been made. Women's MMA was here, and it was here to stay. From that moment on, Ronda Rousey became a star unlike anything the UFC had ever seen. Her fights weren't just contests, they were spectacles. She carried herself with the arrogance of a prize fighter, walking into press conferences with sunglasses on,